I always believed my marriage to Aisha was built on a foundation of unshakable trust. She had a warmth that drew people toward her, an elegance in the way she carried herself, and a smile that could dissolve even the heaviest of my worries. For years, I had been proud to call her my wife. We shared laughter, routine, and dreams of a future together. What I did not realize at the time was that familiarity can sometimes blind a man to the cracks forming beneath the surface. My oldest friend, Imran, had been a part of my life long before Aisha entered it. We grew up together, went to school together, and had celebrated milestones side by side. When I got married, he was one of the few people I trusted enough to invite into every corner of my personal life. Imran had become almost like family. He knew the layout of my home as if it were his own, and Aisha welcomed his presence with the ease of a hostess who had nothing to hide. It never occurred to me to see their ease with one another as anything more than comfort born of friendship. That evening began like any other, yet it would soon mark the beginning of a story I never wished to tell. My company had called me out of town on short notice. It wasn't unusual. Deadlines and sudden meetings were part of my profession, but I remember the way Aisha's face fell when I told her. "Again?" she asked softly, her tone carrying a trace of disappointment. I kissed her forehead, assuring her it was only for a night. She smiled in return, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Before I left, Imran dropped by to lend me a document I had requested earlier in the week. He stayed for tea, chatting easily with Aisha in the living room while I prepared my bag in the bedroom. Their voices mingled with laughter, drifting through the walls in a way that struck me as perfectly ordinary. When I joined them, I noticed how relaxed they looked in each other's company. Imran leaned back in his chair, gesturing animatedly, while Aisha poured more tea, her laughter light and melodic. It was a familiar sight, one I had witnessed countless times. Why would it trouble me now? Still, there had been little moments lately that I had chosen to overlook. Aisha seemed livelier in Imran's presence, quicker to smile, quicker to share stories she didn't always tell me. Sometimes I caught her listening intently to him, her eyes holding a softness that unsettled me in ways I couldn't explain. Yet my loyalty to both of them drowned those suspicions before they could take shape. It was easier to believe that my wife and my best friend simply shared a good rapport, and nothing more. When the time came to leave, Imran offered to drive me to the station. I declined, telling him to stay and enjoy Aisha's company until she finished preparing dinner. "It will save her from feeling lonely," I said with a laugh, genuinely thinking I was doing something considerate. Aisha glanced at me then, her lips pressed into a faint smile. Looking back, I cannot decide whether it was gratitude or something more complicated. As I stepped out of the house, the evening air carried a chill, yet my heart was light with trust. I believed in the constancy of my marriage and the loyalty of my friend. I believed that the people I loved most would never betray me. With that conviction, I boarded the train, unaware that the very bond one had relied on so blindly was already beginning to unravel. That night I wasn't at home, but someone else was. The house felt unusually quiet after I left, or so Aisha would later recall to herself. She moved through the living room absent-mindedly, setting the empty teacups aside and straightening the cushions as though such small chores could silence the restlessness tugging at her chest. The evening stretched ahead of her, long and uneventful, the kind of silence that made every creak of the walls sound louder than it should. Imran lingered longer than expected. He had risen to leave when I closed the door behind me, yet instead of heading out immediately, he stood at the window for a moment, commenting on the coolness of the night. Aisha, uncertain whether to encourage him to stay or usher him out, found herself offering another cup of tea. He accepted without hesitation, settling back into the chair with a comfort that no longer seemed merely casual. Their conversation began innocently, drifting from one subject to another. They spoke of work, of the city, of old stories that Imran and I had shared in younger days. But gradually, the dialogue narrowed into something quieter, more intimate. Imran leaned forward, his tone softening as he asked Aisha about her own life, her own frustrations. She rarely spoke about herself with such honesty, But tonight with him, the words came more easily. "You deserve more time for yourself," he said. His gaze fixed on her with a depth that unsettled her. "He is always busy. I don't blame him, but sometimes do you feel forgotten?" Aisha hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "Not forgotten," she murmured. "Just less seen." The weight of her confession hung between them. It was the kind of admission that should have been left unsaid, yet once spoken, it created a dangerous intimacy, a thread that pulled them closer together. Imran reached across the table, his hand brushing hers in what seemed at first an accidental touch. But she didn't pull away. The air shifted then, charged with an unspoken possibility. Aisha's heart raced, torn between the echo of loyalty and the undeniable warmth of attention. She told herself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment, yet she didn't move her hand. Imran's thumb grazed her knuckles, and she felt the jolt of it run through her like fire. Minutes stretched into something heavier. Their words grew slower, laden with pauses that said more than speech ever could. Imran's eyes searched hers, and she realized she was no longer looking at him as her husband's friend. She was seeing him as a man, one who desired her, one who saw her in ways she hadn't felt in months. The first kiss was hesitant, as if both were waiting for the other to retreat. But once their lips touched, restraint gave way to hunger. Aisha pulled back only for a breath, whispering his name as though it might anchor her, but Imran silenced her with another kiss, firmer, more certain. The walls of her home, once sacred, now bore witness to a betrayal that was both intoxicating and irreversible. They moved as though in a trance, driven less by logic than by longing. Each glance, each touch eroded the boundaries that once seemed unbreakable. For Aisha, it was a collision of guilt and desire. For Imran, a surrender he could no longer resist. In that fragile space, they allowed themselves to believe that one night of indulgence could remain hidden, tucked away as a secret the world would never know. When it was over, silence reclaimed the room, heavier than before. Aisha sat beside him, her body still, her thoughts unraveling. She wanted to speak, to name what had happened, but the words refused to form. Imran lit a cigarette, his hand trembling slightly, though his expression carried an air of calm he didn't truly feel. Neither of them acknowledged the enormity of what they had done. To speak of it would have been to admit its permanence, and so they sat in uneasy quiet, convincing themselves it was only a moment, a lapse, something that could be forgotten when morning came. Yet deep down, both of them knew that nothing could return to how it was. "I returned earlier than expected. The meeting that had pulled me away concluded sooner than anyone anticipated, and I decided not to waste another night apart from Aisha." As the train rattled back toward the city, I pictured her waiting at home, perhaps annoyed at my sudden departure, but smiling once she saw me walk through the door. That image kept me warm during the ride, though unease stirred in my chest for reasons I couldn't name. When I entered the house, the lights were still on. The air was heavy with a faint scent of perfume mixed with something sharper, cigarette smoke, though neither of us smoked. I frowned, setting my bag by the door, the sound of the latch clicking far louder than usual. "Aisha!" called out softly. There was no answer. The house was quiet, yet not the tranquil kind of quiet I had expected. It felt loaded, as though silence itself were hiding something. I stepped into the living room, noticing the half-empty cups on the table, the cushions slightly askew. They could have been remnants of an ordinary evening, but my instincts told me otherwise. From down the hall I heard the faintest sound, shuffling, hurried, almost panicked. My pulse quickened as I followed it, each step weighted with dread. When I reached the bedroom door I paused. My hand trembled on the knob, torn between the desire to know and the fear of confirming what my heart already suspected. The door creaked open, and the sight that met me will never fade from memory. Aisha stood frozen, her hair disheveled, her expression caught between guilt and terror. Imran was beside her, half-dressed, his face draining of color as though he had seen a ghost. In that single moment, the years of friendship, the trust, the laughter, all collapsed into a heap of betrayal so sharp it robbed me of breath. I couldn't speak at first. My throat constricted, my chest burned, and yet no words came. Finally I managed only one. Why? Neither answered. Aisha's lips parted, but her voice betrayed her. Imran looked away, unable to meet my eyes. His silence an admission louder than any confession. Anger surged through me, hot and blinding. I wanted to strike, to shout, to tear down the walls of that room. But beneath the rage was something deeper, a hollow grief that made my knees weak. This was not just the loss of loyalty. It was the loss of the world I had believed in. Aisha reached for me, whispering, "It was a mistake. Please listen." I stepped back, the gesture sharper than any blade. "A mistake," I repeated, my voice trembling. "You call this a mistake? In my home with my friend?" Imran finally spoke, his tone low, almost pleading. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I swear to you." "Don't," I cut him off, my voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. "Don't insult me with excuses." The silence that followed was unbearable. It pressed against my chest, suffocating. I looked at them. My wife, the woman I had vowed to cherish, and my closest friend, the man I had trusted more than a brother, and felt something within me shatter irreparably. I left the room without another word. My steps echoed in the hallway, each one heavier than the last. Behind me I could hear Aisha's muffled sobs, Imran's attempts at calming her, but none of it mattered anymore. The bond that had tied us together had been cut, and nothing could mend it. Sitting alone in the living room, I stared at the empty cups on the table, symbols of a night I would never erase. I thought of the laughter I had once heard between them, the subtle glances I had ignored, the signs I had brushed aside in the name of trust. All of it made sense now, cruelly clear in hindsight. Trust, once broken, leaves behind a wound that never fully heals. That night, I lost not only a wife and a friend, but also the innocence of believing that love and loyalty were unshakable. And though the house still stood, it no longer felt like home.